Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I started working as an independent contractor in the IT field about 20 years ago. My work ranged from building simple websites to managing complete IT infrastructure for big hotels. One of my clients back when I was coding larger custom websites was a rental company. Before I even met with the owner, several people warned me about him. He had a reputation for being sharp, backstabbing, and manipulative. He was a lawyer, which explained a lot. I went into the partnership keeping those warnings in mind. He wanted a new website for his rental business where property owners could list their homes, and renters would sign up and pay a subscription fee. He would collect all the revenue. The setup was fairly standard. We negotiated a good deal, put everything on paper, signed it, and I started working on the project. The coding in PHP was going well until he suddenly demanded that I show him progress only 1 week into the process. He wanted to see the website front end immediately. This was just the beginning of the problems. I tried explaining that the front end work wasn't scheduled to start until after 6 weeks of back end programming and that I only had pure code to show him right now. The contract we signed spelled this out word for word. He got aggressive and demanded that I put everything on hold to do the front end first, both design and programming. I was young and inexperienced at the time, so I agreed without asking for it to be added to the contract as an amendment. I started working on the design. The contract said I had free control of the design decisions as long as I kept the same color scheme and used the same logo on the site. I made a quick draft in Fireworks back when it was still a Macromedia product before Adobe bought them out. Within 2 days, I showed him. He wasn't happy and demanded a different direction with a whole list of new requirements. I wanted to keep the customer satisfied, so I did exactly what he wanted. I designed a new layout with all his demands, but he didn't like that either. This continued for the next 3 months, an endless cycle where nothing was ever good enough. Close to 4 months into the project, he demanded to see a working version of the back end. I pointed out that he was the one who changed the order of how the project was being done and had demanded that I do the front-end design first instead of the back-end like the contract said. He turned this around on me and said that the contract we both signed required me to have a working back-end to show him at the end of the month. He threatened that if I didn't honor that, he would take his business elsewhere and seek compensation for my lack of professionalism. I now had 12 days to build a back-end for the site. I got a friend to help me and we worked without stopping through the weekend. I had a solid base to work from in 9 days. At this point, he had only paid the security deposit on the contract, about 5% of the total price. He shielded himself from paying by saying that if I couldn't honor the contract, why should he? And that I needed to finish certain work before he would pay according to the contract terms. Remembering all the warnings I had heard about this guy, I decided to add a special function to the code just to be safe. By the end of the month, we had a front-end design he accepted and a back-end that was about 85% finished according to the contract requirements. I still had 1 month left to complete everything else. Time to show him what I had built. Since I was working on this during development, I ran it on my own server and showed him through a browser on his computer. I told him that since I only had 512 kilobits per second upstream from the server, it might lag a little, but it wouldn't have that problem when it was put on the production server at his hosting company. He said that was acceptable, and the demonstration continued. When I showed him the site, both front-end and back-end, I could see he was extremely happy with it, though he would never admit it out loud. He was trying to hide the smile that kept appearing and his eyes lit up thinking about all the ways he could start making money from it. He complained that it was way too slow and started listing problems with various features. He told me he wanted me to put it up on his production server to see how fast the speed would be. I said that was no problem and asked him to pay 50% of the contract so I could get started on it. I waited a few days and then received an email from him with a forwarded message from the bank showing a transaction from him to me. for the 50% I requested. I pushed the system to his production server so he could look at it under a beta subdomain. I sent him an email with the login credentials he needed. What he didn't know was that I had found out he was looking for another programmer to take over this project, someone to pick up from a lazy worker who couldn't do anything right. I knew he would probably try to cheat me. I also suspected the email he sent me with the transaction proof was fake, which it turned out to be. That small function I mentioned earlier was designed so that if his user account tried to remove my admin account from the system without one specific setting being changed in the configuration first, the system would delete and erase the database completely, then remove all the files in the web directory. Not 5 minutes after he read the email from me, he did exactly that. He tried to delete my admin account from the system to log me out. He had nothing left of the project. Everything was gone. Since it's considered forgery to fake an email, especially from a bank, I sent the information to the authorities. He went under investigation by both the police and the bank lawyers. I sold the system to a competitor of his for a better price than what was originally contracted to him. Last I heard, he was blacklisted from owning a company and lost his right to work as a lawyer. I only got that 5% he paid at the beginning, and for working just over 5 months on this project that was hardly anything. But knowing what happened to him because of his own greed and dishonesty will keep me satisfied for the rest of my life. I've been flipping houses for a few years when I found this property. The price was right and the location seemed decent enough. I closed on it and planned to renovate the place over the next several months. On my first day there, before I'd even finished unloading my truck, someone knocked on the door. It was the woman from next door. Her husband stood behind her with his arms folded across his chest. She told me she was the block captain and ran things in this neighborhood. I tried to smile and be friendly. I explained that I was just here to fix up the house. But she kept talking, and I started to understand what kind of people they were. She went on about how she had connections at City Hall. She told me about all the neighbors she'd forced to make improvements to their properties. She talked about getting rid of renters she didn't like. She described all the people she'd harassed over the years like it was something to be proud of. My significant other was standing next to me during this whole introduction. When they finally left, my partner looked at me and said it was only a matter of time before they turned on us too. That prediction came true faster than I expected. Once I started working on the house, the wife next door became a huge problem. She showed up one afternoon and told me I needed to put up a fence. She said people were cutting through my yard and it scared her. I told her I'd think about it. A few days later, both she and her husband came to my door together. They informed me that I needed to deal with the weeds in my yard or they'd take care of it themselves and send me the bill. I ignored them. Then a storm rolled through a couple of weeks later. One of the trees on my property scraped against their roof and damaged a few shingles. They knocked on my door and told me I owed them $1,200 for repairs. I looked into the situation. The tree had been there long before I bought the place. According to city code, they were responsible for trimming any branches that hung over the property line. I told them I wouldn't be paying. About a week later, I came home to find that someone had jumped my fence and cut down the trees. I later found out it was one of their relatives. After that, I stopped trying to be nice. I just avoided them completely. The wife didn't appreciate being ignored. She started bothering another neighbor for a while, but always came back to me eventually. One afternoon, I was tearing down my old deck to make room for a patio. That's when I discovered something that made my blood boil. She had set up a feral cat colony on part of my property. I've been wondering why there were so many stray cats hanging around. Now I had my answer. I called the city right away and told them it needed to be removed. They explained that she'd followed all the legal steps to get it approved. I spent weeks trying to find a way to get it shut down. During that time, her behavior got worse. She started standing in her window staring at me whenever I was outside. She'd yell things at me through the window. She'd bang on the fence with random objects to scare my dog. I decided I'd had enough. I started documenting everything. I took videos and photos of her behavior. Then I filed for a harassment restraining order against her. The court granted it based on the evidence I submitted. She contested it and claimed it damaged her reputation. Before the hearing, her husband tried to intimidate me physically. He got in my face and made threats, so I filed a harassment restraining order against him as well. That one was also granted. They both tried to avoid being served the paperwork. I had to get it published in the newspaper to complete the service. At the hearing, it came out that the husband already had a harassment restraining order against him from another neighbor. That's when I decided to really turn up the pressure. I started making formal complaints about their property. I called the police when they did anything that warranted it. And something interesting happened. Other neighbors noticed what I was doing and realized they could fight back too. They'd been bullied by this couple for years, and now they saw a way out. I needed to replace my front door and had to get a building permit. I knew they were doing some remodeling inside their house, so I called a city inspector and reported them. They got fined for not having the proper permits. The wife went off on the inspector when he showed up. He looked over at my house and saw that I had my permit clearly displayed in the window. Their back porch was covered in junk and clutter. I made another call to the city. They were ordered to clean it up. They had a broken window on their porch door. I called an inspector about that too. They had to replace the entire door. The paint on their house was peeling off in huge sections. I reported that as well. They were told they had to repaint. The inspector also noticed that some of the wood underneath was rotted. He saw that their front porch was sloping dangerously. They had to fix the porch, replace all the rotted wood, and repaint the whole house. Throughout all of this, they'd installed cameras everywhere. They wanted proof that they weren't doing the things I was reporting. One of their cameras pointed straight into my backyard. That was technically illegal, but my harassment restraining order specifically mentioned her habit of watching me constantly. So every time I walked to or from my garage, I flipped off the camera. She filed a complaint with the city about it. By that point, the city was tired of dealing with her. They told her that by complaining about what I was doing on camera, she was admitting that she was watching me all the time. The battle over the cat colony dragged on for months. Then I noticed that one of the cats looked really sick. I started trapping the cats and taking them to animal control. Since animal control was part of the feral cat program, the cats wouldn't be put down, but she'd have to pay a fine to get each one back or agree to shut down the colony. Eventually, I caught the sick cat. It tested positive for rabies. Part of the program rules required her to trap every new cat and get it vaccinated. I found her GoFundMe page for the cat colony. In her own words, she admitted that she wasn't vaccinating the cats. I reported the page and showed them proof that she wasn't using the donations the way she claimed. The GoFundMe was shut down. The city had no choice but to act. They closed the cat colony. The animal control officer who'd been ignoring my complaints was fired. The couple called in a city mediator to try to resolve things. We attended one meeting. I brought all my documentation. I told the mediator we wouldn't meet directly with them. I also handed over screenshots of racist tweets they'd posted about other neighbors. The city cut all ties with them as community leaders. Their power in the neighborhood was gone. They'd spent what had to be thousands of dollars on fines and repairs. The same thing they'd forced countless other neighbors to do over the years. After 14 years in that house, they put up a for sale sign. They moved way out to the suburbs to a place where their nearest neighbor was 50 yards away. They knew I was almost done with my renovations and would be selling within a year. But they couldn't wait that long. Without the ability to push people around, without everyone being afraid of them anymore, they had no reason to stay. I kept finding new things to report about their property until they left. When I finally listed my house for sale, it sold in less than 2 weeks. Theirs was still sitting on the market. As one last parting gift, I contacted the county tax assessor. I let them know that the couple had both their old house and their new house listed as their primary homestead. That meant they'd been paying reduced property taxes on both. They got hit with additional fines right as they were leaving. When I heard about it, I couldn't stop smiling. I served 2 tours in Iraq with the army before coming home and trying to figure out what normal life looked like again. The transition wasn't easy. I had my good days and my bad days, but I managed to find work as a mechanic and kept myself busy enough to avoid dwelling on things too much. That's when I got the call from my buddy's son. He told me his grandfather had moved out to Arizona after his wife passed away. The old man wanted to be closer to family, so he bought a house in one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods with a homeowners association. His grandson explained that the grandfather had served over 20 years in the Marine Corps, fighting in both Korea and Vietnam as an infantryman. The man had earned the right to fly whatever flag he wanted. But the homeowners association didn't see it that way. The grandfather had hung his Marine Corps flag outside his house just like he'd done at his old place back east. Within days, he got a notice saying it violated the regulations. He even went to a meeting to ask for an exemption since American flags were allowed. They told him he could keep the flag in his garage or inside his house but not outside. The grandson said his grandfather was planning something and wanted to invite some veterans over for a barbecue and brainstorming session. I didn't have much else going on that weekend, so I said I'd be there. When I showed up at the house that Saturday, there were already several trucks and cars parked on the street. I walked up to the garage and found it packed with guys ranging from their 20s to their 70s. The grandfather stood near a grill, flipping burgers. He was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, gruff old Marine. Stocky build, weathered face, and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. The grandfather welcomed me and told me to grab a beer from the cooler and help myself to some food. I grabbed a drink and found a spot to stand. There were 12 of us total, including the grandfather, his son, and his grandson. Once everyone had eaten, the grandfather pulled out a handbook. He told us to listen up because he had a plan to convince the homeowners association to let him fly his flag. He said that Marine Corps flag was older than his grandson, and he'd be damned if he was going to let some pencil pushers tell him he couldn't display it. He needed our help to make this work. He passed the handbook around and we all took turns reading through the rules. That's when someone noticed a loophole. The regulations said you could have anything you wanted in your garage. You could also keep your garage door open so long the garage was actively being used. There was also a noise ordinance that ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. The grandson suggested we use the garage all day every day and make it very clear we're veterans. The son added that we could make it loud enough that the whole neighborhood knows what's going on. The ideas started flowing after that. Someone suggested playing Reveille at 6 in the morning. Someone else mentioned doing formation runs through the neighborhood. Another guy brought up the idea of doing workouts and drills in the garage all day. By the end of the afternoon, we had Operation Pride mapped out. The following Monday, several of us showed up at the grandfather's house at 5:45 in the morning. At exactly 6, we blasted Reveille from a boombox. We stood in formation on the front lawn and did calisthenics, counting off loudly like we were back in basic training. I called out the numbers and everyone repeated them back in unison. Those of us who still had good knees went for a run through the neighborhood in formation. We sang cadences while we jogged, our voices echoing off the houses. I hadn't sung those in years, but the words came back instantly. The grandfather even taught us one called napalm sticks to kids that was definitely not politically correct but got the point across. When we got back from the run, we rotated shifts in the garage. The grandfather had decorated it with military flags donated by those of us participating. There were the traditional branch flags, but also some more aggressive ones. Death from above, kill them first and let God sort them out. A few others that would probably make the homeowners association members clutch their pearls. The grandson and his father had chipped in to buy a punching dummy, the kind you fill with sand or water. We used it for bayonet practice. All day long, you could hear someone in that garage yelling at the top of their lungs. I shouted the words "kill" over and over while I stabbed that dummy repeatedly, each thrust releasing something I didn't even know I'd been holding onto. The grandfather let those of us who didn't have our own rifle and bayonet borrow one of his old M1s. Holding that piece of history felt sacred. When we weren't attacking the dummy, we did weightlifting, practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques, and held lectures. Some of the topics included proper knife fighting techniques and how to project your voice on the parade ground. We kept this up until 10 at night. The next morning at 6, we started all over again. By the third day, the Homeowners Association president showed up. He asked what exactly was going on here. The grandfather told him he was just spending time with some friends and there was nothing in the rules against that. The president said this was extremely disruptive to the neighborhood. The grandfather pointed out that we were following all the regulations. The noise ordinance didn't start until 10, and we stopped right at 9:59. The garage was being actively used and everything was by the book. The president turned red, but he couldn't argue. The cops showed up twice that week. Both times they just shrugged and said we weren't breaking any laws. One officer explained that bayonet practice in your garage isn't illegal, and neither is working out or playing music during permitted hours. He just asked us to keep it down after 10. We assured them we would and continued our routine. By day 8, the grandfather received a letter. He opened it in front of all of us during our afternoon session. The grandfather announced that they were saying he can fly his Marine Corps flag outside his house. We all cheered. The grandson raised his beer and said mission accomplished. But something unexpected had happened over those 8 days. What started out to get revenge on the Homeowners Association had turned into something much more meaningful. Depending on the day and time, there were anywhere from 3 to 18 of us at that house. Veterans from Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and Iraq. We'd shared stories. Some of us had opened up about our struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder for the first time. The grandfather had told us about firefights in the jungles of Vietnam and frozen hell of Korea. I'd talked about losing friends in Fallujah. Others shared their own demons. The grandfather stood up and cleared his throat. He thanked all of us for what we'd done there, not just for the flag, but for reminding this old man what brotherhood feels like. He said he'd like to make this a regular thing if we were all interested. Last Sunday of every month at his place was barbecue and whatever else we want to do. Every single one of us agreed. For 18 months, we met at the grandfather's house on that last Sunday. We grilled, shared stories, helped each other through rough patches, and just existed in a space where we didn't have to explain ourselves. Then the grandfather died. His funeral was packed. Every one of us who'd been part of Operation Pride was there. The morning of the funeral, we gathered outside his house at 6 in the morning. We played Reveille one last time. We jogged through the neighborhood singing cadences in his honor. That old Marine Corps flag was folded and given to his son. It still flies at the son's house today. This all happened 14 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Not because we stuck it to a homeowners association, though that was satisfying, but because a stubborn old Marine who just wanted to fly his flag ended up creating something none of us knew we needed. A place where we could be understood. A place where our service mattered. A place where we could heal together. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.